Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today we have a shorty solo episode and we are going to be talking about blame. And that is when your child blames you, something happens and they say, it's all your fault. That's what we're going to be talking about today, or when they try to blame somebody else. That comes up so much when we are coaching or in our community or in our Facebook group. And parents really worry about that and they want to know what to do. Before we get started, though, I want to make sure that you know about our Peaceful Parenting Reset that is starting on Monday, January 22nd. It's totally free. It's a 5-day event. We're going to be doing one small thing a day that is going to really reset your parenting if you've been struggling or you feel like you've fallen off the peaceful parenting wagon, or even if you're just getting started with peaceful parenting. If you go to sarahrosensweet.com/reset, you can sign up for free. As I said, we're going to be doing one tool a day. It's just going to be minutes a day. I haven't run this since April of last year, but it's something that we usually do every year. And basically, taking some small, consistent baby steps to really get you in a different place by Friday from where you started on Monday. And so if you are listening to this after the week of Monday, January 22nd, you can still sign up to be notified the next time we do our Peaceful Parenting Reset. But please go ahead over to sarahrosensweet.com/reset, sign up for free. As I said, we start on Monday. It is literally minutes a day that you can practice the tools that we're going to be revealing to you each day. And you will find that you are in a much different place on Friday than you were on Monday when you start. And every day during the reset, I'm also going to be doing live coaching, live Q&As. You'll get all the information if you sign up at sarahrosensweet.com. sarahrosensweet.com/reset. So I hope to see you in the reset. This is one of the events that people in our community love the most out of everything that we do. And as I said, it's totally free. And it really does show you that with small baby steps, you can really get far and make big changes. So let's dive back into talking about blame. So, what I see often is when a child gets hurt or upset, instead of taking responsibility, they want to blame somebody else. Well, if you hadn't done that, or if he hadn't done that, it's all your fault, or whatever it is, right? So we have to remember that so we're going to talk about why this happens and what to do about it, and then some general good practices for raising our kids so that they end up taking responsibility for their actions. So we have to remember that when a child gets hurt or upset, then that sets off the emergency response system of fight, flight, or freeze in their bodies. And if they are upset, that overwhelm of their own big feelings registers as an emergency in their body, just like if somebody stepped on their toe, or they, fell and hurt their knee, or whatever it is. It's still going to set off that emergency response system of fight, flight, or freeze, because our nervous system, our amygdala and limbic system can't tell the difference between a real threat of pain and injury or a perceived threat of that overwhelm, right? So when our child gets hurt or upset, it sets off the fight, flight, or freeze, and that blame, or yelling at somebody or even hitting them or whatever, is that fight of the fight, flight, or freeze. It's also, we have to remember that it's also a subconscious instinct that we have as humans to get rid of those difficult feelings when they happen to us. So if we feel hurt or upset, it's uncomfortable. We don't want to feel that way. So not only has it launched that emergency response, that fight, flight, or freeze, but we don't want to feel that way. We want to get back to feeling good, right? So the blame can also be a subconscious attempt to get rid of difficult feelings. So it's kind of like a hot potato, like, I don't want to feel this way. Here, you feel this way. So I'm going to, and it's subconscious. It's our kids are not doing this on purpose or trying to, shirk their responsibilities. It's a subconscious attempt to get rid of that difficult feeling, and because they don't want to hold it, right? So it's that hot potato, like, I'm going to make it your fault so that I don't have to feel these hard feelings. And I just want to reiterate, I know I've said this, but I want to reiterate that it's subconscious, right? It's not their kids doing it on purpose. And the fight or flight response is also completely automatic, right? We don't stop and think that I'm going to lash out now, but that lashing out happens because that nervous system has gotten hijacked and the fight response has happened. Another thing that I want us to think about when we're thinking about the fight or flight, when we're thinking about the attempt to get rid of those difficult feelings, is that anger, which is what's happening when a kid is blaming somebody else, that lashing out, it's your fault, you made me do it, or whatever it is, that anger is a secondary emotion. So we don't ever first feel anger. We first feel something else. So we first maybe feel embarrassment or hurt feelings or sadness. And those are very vulnerable feelings, which is hard to feel those feelings, right? We generally don't like to feel hard feelings. We want to avoid those hard feelings. And so when we do feel those hard feelings, the anger is a protection against those harder feelings. Again, this is automatic. We're not thinking, oh, I'd rather be angry than sad. But when we feel that sadness, again, it's that overwhelm of the nervous system or the embarrassment or frustration or jealousy or, whatever it is. When we feel those feelings, that sets off that anger, right? So the anger, it's like the vulnerable feelings projected outward instead of feeling them deeply ourselves. So if somebody hurts your feelings, it's easier to say, like, what's your problem, than it is to feel the hurt feelings. So that's part of what's going on with the blame too, right? It's that the anger is a protection against the vulnerable feelings. So I hope you understand a little bit more now why that blame happens. It's not that our child is trying to get out of something, or that they're going to grow up to never take responsibility for their actions or whatever it is. It's just a complicated process of that fight, flight, or freeze, and that emotional, avoiding the emotional vulnerability piece and trying to feel better. So that's really what's happening when your child blames you, when they're hurt or upset, or blame somebody else. So what do we want to do about it? I know we all want to raise great kids, right? We all want to raise great kids who take responsibility when they make a mistake or do something wrong, who don't lash out at other people when they get hurt. So I want us to remember that this is really a product, I don't know, 95% of the time, this is just a product of immaturity, right? They don't have the brain development yet to have that emotional regulation, or they don't have the perspective yet, or they don't have the practice with dealing with strong feelings. So this is often something that you see in smaller kids, or even kids, leading up to the double digits, whereas, this is something that's going to go away with maturity. If this is still happening and you have an older child, pay attention to what I'm going to tell you in a few minutes about, what we can do about this. But it's generally something that we see in kids who are younger, who are more intense, who have that, we do call them complex kids sometimes, those kids who are more intense, more sensitive, more strong-willed, more spirited. So those kids who are complex, sometimes it takes them longer to develop emotional regulation. I don't know if it's because there's just more to integrate in the brain and with that emergency response system, or whether it's that they have a little bit of a lagging brain development. I don't know exactly what it is, but I do know that if you have an intense child, it often takes them longer to develop that emotional regulation piece. So don't worry. Like, it doesn't mean your child is going to grow up to never, to turn into an adult who'll never take responsibility for their actions. As I said, this is often a sign of just that immaturity piece. So what do we want to do? We want to avoid the trap that I see a lot of parents falling into, and that's the trap of trying to explain to the child, well, no, it's actually not my fault, or it's not your brother's fault, or whatever. You did this because you weren't looking where you were going. Um, I do have a podcast episode about why we don't need to make it a teachable moment. And this is one of those times where parents often want to make it a teachable moment of, wanting to, as I said, we want to raise great kids and who take responsibility for their actions. And so we often fall into this trap of trying to explain in the moment of, why it's actually your child's fault. First of all, nobody ever learns anything when they are upset or dysregulated, and that, a child who's blaming you is upset or dysregulated. That's just not, their thinking brain has gone offline, and they're operating out of their amygdala and their limbic system, and it's just not the time for teaching. And you might not ever have to go back to it, because when your child is back in their thinking brain, They do know that it was their fault. They do know that it wasn't their brother's fault. And you don't have to go back and revisit it. That often feels like shame to a child. Hey, remember a little while ago when you did this, that was really your fault. I mean, how would you feel if your partner came to you after you had a big upset and you were, maybe feeling a little sheepish and embarrassed, and then insisted on talking to you about it, and getting you to, admit your shortcomings or whatever. Most of the time, we can just let it go because our child knows that they were acting irrationally and blaming somebody for something that wasn't their fault. Um, and deep down they do know that, even while it's happening, deep down they do know, this isn't my mom's fault or my dad's fault that I tripped over this thing and hurt my knee. So we just really want to we don't want to fall into that trap of trying to teach or trying to let them know why it's not our fault. Another reason why we might be tempted to fall into that trap of trying to get out from underneath the blame, let me just put it that way, is because we feel bad, right? Like we are feeling like we are feeling some shame that our child is saying it's our fault. And so we might try to say like, oh, no, it's not my fault, I didn't do that. So we want to remember, I'm worthy and lovable. You know my phrase, right? I'm worthy and lovable, even though my child is yelling at me and telling me that it's my fault. We don't have to take that on, right? We don't have to take on that, um, the responsibility that they're trying to put on us. We don't have to argue that it's not our fault. We don't have to take it on in our heart. We can protect ourselves with that, that self-compassion. And even though they're doing this, I'm still worthy and lovable. And that will prevent us from having also our fight or flight activated and then getting in a fight with our child about whose fault it is. So whether it's out of teaching that that you fall into that trap of trying to explain why it's not your fault, or whether it's because it makes you feel some shame that your child is saying that it's your fault, that's something we really want to watch out for. We don't want to fall into that trap. If your child is saying it's your fault, you don't have to either say, yes, it is my fault, or no, it's not my fault. You can totally sidestep that blame, right? You can just sidestep the blame. You don't have to pick it up. You don't have to address it. You can just sidestep. So, what do we do in the moment when our child is upset or hurt and blaming us? So, we want to respond like we would with any other upset. We want to empathize. And I know some of you out there, your child does not respond well to words of empathy, makes them feel more upset or more angry. If that's you, you might want to make sure that you actually are empathizing and that you're not just saying the words of empathy, that you are actually empathizing, and not just saying like, oh, you must be so sad about that. Because if you're not actually feeling like you understand your child's point of view, no words are going to register for them as empathy. It's just a little bit of a sidebar of why sometimes words of empathy can make a child more upset. But sometimes when we really are empathetic and we say something to our child, it can make them more upset because it brings them a little bit further into the feelings, or they just don't like it. I'm not exactly sure why, but I know for some of you, you've said, I've tried all of that and it just makes my child more upset. So when I say respond with empathy like we would for any other upset, sometimes that looks like saying nothing and just feeling in your heart some empathy, just being quiet and feeling in your heart, remembering your child is going through some backpack emptying in that moment, right? They're crying, they're trying to release some of those big feelings that they're having. And we want to try to get to get underneath the anger. Because anger is not actually in the emotional backpack, right? Anger is a response to the feelings that are underneath. As I said before, underneath every angry feeling is a more tender feelings. So we want to empathize and we want to go to what's underneath the feeling. Oh, that must have hurt. Oh, didn't want that to happen. We want to focus on whatever the situation is, not the blame itself. So, as I said, we don't need to say, yes, we're to blame or no, we're not to blame. We want to sidestep that whole question and just focus on empathizing and whatever the issue is, right? Focus on the hurt, not the blame. I'm just going to say that again. Focus on the hurt, not the blame, if your child is blaming you. And so, yeah, just stay with it. And your child may or may not have the sort of textbook response, but we still want to have we still want to go through the same process of just welcoming the feelings, when your child is upset or excited. So, general best practices. We want to watch ourselves. If our child tends to blame others a lot, we want to maybe do a little introspection. Like, do we blame other people? Are we a perfectionist and that it's so crushing to us to have made a mistake or a bad decision that we're always looking for reasons why it wasn't our fault? So that's something. I'm not saying that all of you who have a child who blames you or blames other people is doing it because they've seen you do it, but that could be a possibility. So really, we want to look at that. Do we blame other people? Are we always looking for reasons why we're not wrong or why we didn't make a mistake? And that is a very perfectionistic tendency. And so again, what I was saying before, we want to bring self-compassion. If we do make mistakes or bad decisions, um, I'm worthy and lovable, even though I just did this thing. So just that's my first thing to focus on is really watch ourselves. We also want, if our child tends to blame a lot and get kind of like locked in anger instead of going to the sadness or the hurt or the upset, we want to make sure we're doing lots of laughter. It could be that your child feels really uncomfortable with vulnerable feelings, right? Uncomfortable with the sadness, the frustration, the disappointment, even being hurt. So we really want, when we laugh with a child or we get them laughing a lot, we are creating connection, and we're creating in that connection we're creating safety. And I don't mean literal safety, and I don't mean that you're doing something wrong, your child doesn't feel safe with you. I'm doing safe in air quotes if you're not watching the video, but that your child might not feel safe in themselves from their vulnerable feelings. So, laughter is a really great daily practice to build safety, to get a child comfortable with being more vulnerable through that connection with you. So, that's just a really good practice, general practice to do if this is something that happens a lot with your child. We also want to talk about and normalize strong feelings because, as I said at the top of this episode, our child can go into fight or flight because their own feelings register as overwhelm in their nervous system, their own strong feelings. So we can talk about, things that we're reading or watching, or that, that character has very strong feelings, don't they? We can talk about it after the fact. Wow, you were having some really strong feelings. That's totally normal, right? We want to talk about strong feelings. We want to normalize strong feelings. Everybody has strong feelings sometimes. Of course, you had strong feelings when that happened. So, really talking about noticing and normalizing strong feelings is a really good best practice for families who have a child who tends to blame when they get hurt or upset. The last thing that I want to say about for general best practices, if this happens a lot in your family, is really watch yourself again, or watch the people in your life, and make sure that you are not always looking for whose fault it is. I know sometimes people tend to do that when something goes wrong. They want to know whose fault it is, or they want to find out whose fault it is, or figure out whose fault it is. When you think about that, that's blame, right? Like, blame is like it's your fault or somebody else's fault. So instead of finding out whose fault it is or figuring out whose fault it is, train yourself instead to focus on solutions. What can we do to solve this problem? I mean, if somebody's upset, the solution is welcoming the feelings. If somebody's hurt, trying to make them feel better. But just any sort of problems, messes, lateness, like, whatever happens in your family when things are hard, really try to stay away from whose fault is it, because that is going to really set the groundwork for a child who's always wanting to blame other people. So I hope this has been helpful. I know this is just a question. This is an episode I've been wanting to do for a long time because this is something that just comes up so much. And so I hope this was helpful. I would love to see you in the reset. Again, we're going to do one tool a day, small steps towards big changes. We're going to have live coaching every day with me, live lesson and Q&A every day, Monday through Friday, the week of January 22nd. If you are listening to this after the fact, you can sign up at that same page, which is sararosensweet.com/reset. You can sign up to be notified the next time we do a reset. But if it's before January 22nd or even during the week of January 22nd, you can catch up. You can sign up if it's before the week. You can catch up if we've already started. So go ahead and go to sararosensweet.com/reset. I really hope to see you in the reset. I love doing this. It's a great way to start out 2024. I know that we had another tough year, and families are really feeling a lot of stress right now. Kids are having a hard time, and this is a really, really good way to get you back on track to having things feel easier in your family, to get back on the peaceful parenting wagon, or to get started on peaceful parenting if you are new to peaceful parenting. So thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next time on the Peaceful Parenting Podcast.